In the beginning, there was only the vast, empty void known as chaos. From this nothingness, the first beings emerged: Gaia, the earth, and Uranus, the sky. Gaia, rich and nurturing, gave life to the mountains, seas, and all that would come to flourish on her surface. But the union of Gaia and Uranus brought forth something more, a powerful race of giants known as the Titans. The Titans were immense and mighty, possessing strength and power beyond measure. Among them were 12 siblings, each with their own unique attributes. Cronus, the youngest and most ambitious, stood out. As time passed, Uranus became fearful of his own children, sensing that one day they might overthrow him. In his fear, he locked them away deep within Gaia, causing her immense pain. Gaia's heart ached for her children, and she knew that something had to change. One night, Gaia approached her son Cronus, the one she believed had the strength to stand up to Uranus. With a heart full of sorrow and determination, she offered Cronus a sickle, forged from the hardest stone, and asked him to challenge his father. Cronus, driven by a burning desire for power and a deep love for his mother, agreed. As the night sky darkened, Cronus lay in wait. When Uranus descended to be with Gaia, Cronus struck, severing his father's power and casting him from the heavens. The sky was filled with cries of anguish, but from this act of rebellion, the reign of the Titans began. Cronus became the ruler of the universe, taking his sister Rhea as his queen. Under their rule, the world was peaceful, but this peace was not meant to last. Cronus, despite his newfound power, lived in constant fear. He remembered the prophecy his father had spoken with his last breath, that one of his own children would one day rise against him, just as he had done to Uranus. This fear consumed him, turning his heart cold. And so, when Rhea gave birth to their first child, Cronus did the unthinkable. He swallowed the infant whole, believing he could outweak fate itself. One by one, Cronus devoured his children: Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, and Poseidon, each swallowed before they could take their first breath of life. Rhea's heart broke with every loss, but her grief was mixed with a fierce determination. She couldn't bear to lose another child. When Rhea was about to give birth to her sixth child, she devised a plan. With the help of Gaia, she secretly gave birth to her son on the island of Crete, far from Cronus's reach. She named him Zeus. To deceive Cronus, Rhea wrapped a stone in swaddling clothes and presented it to her husband. Without hesitation, Cronus swallowed the stone, believing he had thwarted the prophecy once again. Zeus, hidden and nurtured in the caves of Crete, grew up strong and wise. His heart was filled with a burning desire to free his siblings and bring justice to the world. When the time was right, he sought out the Titaness Métis, who gave him a potion that would force Cronus to regurgitate his swallowed children. Zeus approached Cronus with cunning and bravery, offering him the potion disguised as a drink. Unaware of the trap, Cronus drank it, and soon he was overcome with a violent sickness. One by one, Zeus's siblings emerged, fully grown and ready to join him in the fight against their tyrannical father. The sky shook with thunder as Zeus and his siblings prepared for battle. The once peaceful world was now on the brink of war, a war that would determine the fate of the cosmos. On one side stood the Titans, led by Cronus, their hearts filled with the arrogance of ages past. On the other stood Zeus, with his siblings beside him, burning with the fire of righteousness and the desire to end their father's cruel reign. The war raged for 10 long years, with neither side willing to yield. The earth trembled, the seas roared, and the sky was filled with the clash of titanic forces. But Zeus, with his unmatched strength and unyielding will, refused to be defeated. He called upon the hundred-handed ones and the Cyclopes, ancient beings whom Cronus had imprisoned long ago. Grateful for their freedom, they joined Zeus's cause, providing him with thunderbolts, powerful weapons forged in the heart of the earth. With these new allies, the tide of battle began to turn. Zeus, armed with the thunderbolts, unleashed his fury upon the Titans. The heavens lit up with blinding light as he struck down his enemies, his power unmatched. Cronus, once the mighty ruler of the universe, found himself overwhelmed. In a final, desperate attempt to hold onto his throne, Cronus gathered all his remaining strength and charged at Zeus, but it was too late. Zeus, with a final thunderous blow, cast his father down, banishing him and the other Titans to the dark abyss of Tartarus, where they would remain imprisoned for all eternity. With the Titans defeated, Zeus emerged as the new ruler of the cosmos. The world, once again at peace, began to flourish under his reign. Zeus, with his siblings by his side, established a new order, an order where justice, wisdom, and strength would prevail. He took his place on Mount Olympus, the highest peak in the world, where he and the Olympians would watch over mankind, guiding them through the ages. But even as the dust settled and peace returned, the memory of the Titanomachy lingered. The scars of the battle remained etched in the earth, a reminder of the power struggle that had shaped the world. And so, the legend of the Titans and the rise of the Olympians was passed down through generations, a story of courage, rebellion, and the unyielding will of the gods. Zeus, now the king of the gods, had secured his place in the heavens, but his reign was just beginning. The echoes of the past still whispered in the winds, a constant reminder that power, once gained, must be guarded, for the wheel of fate turns for all, even the gods themselves. In the quiet of the ancient world, before humans knew warmth or light, Prometheus stood alone, watching over the empty earth. He was a Titan, but not like the others. His heart was filled with compassion, not for the mighty gods, but for the fragile creatures that would one day walk the earth. Prometheus could see what others could not, the potential in mankind, the strength in their hearts, and the dreams yet to be born. So, Prometheus decided to create man, shaping them from the clay of the earth with care and tenderness. He crafted each figure with hands that knew the weight of sorrow and the depth of hope. As he breathed life into them, he watched as they took their first steps, unsure and trembling. Prometheus saw the fear in their eyes, the cold that bit at their skin, and the darkness that surrounded them. His heart ached for these beings he had brought into the world, and he knew they needed more than just life, they needed a spark to survive. Prometheus looked to the heavens, where the gods lived in comfort and luxury, untouched by the harshness of the world below. Among them, Zeus ruled with a mighty hand, commanding the forces of nature and the destiny of all creatures. But Zeus did not see humanity as Prometheus did. To Zeus, they were weak and insignificant, unworthy of the gifts of the gods. He believed that keeping humanity in ignorance would keep them obedient, never challenging the gods' authority. But Prometheus could not bear to see his creation suffer. He knew that without light, without warmth, mankind would perish, their potential lost forever. So, Prometheus made a decision that would change the fate of humanity and defy the will of Zeus. He would bring fire to mankind, the divine flame that burned brightly in the heavens, a symbol of knowledge, hope, and survival. Prometheus knew the risks. He understood the wrath of Zeus and the punishment that awaited him. Yet, his love for humanity was stronger than his fear. On a night when the gods were distracted, celebrating their own glory, Prometheus ascended to the heavens. He moved with purpose, his heart pounding in his chest, every step a defiance of the powers that ruled the cosmos. As Prometheus approached the sacred hearth of Olympus, he saw the fire, glowing and alive, its warmth radiating through the cold. He reached out, and with careful hands, he took a single flame, shielding it with his heart as he made his way back to the earth. The journey was long, and the burden was heavy, but Prometheus pressed on, driven by the thought of the men and women waiting in the darkness, unaware of the light that was about to change their lives. When Prometheus returned to Earth, he found mankind huddled together, their bodies shivering, their spirits dim. Without a word, he approached them, and with a gentle breath, he shared the flame. The fire leaped into life, crackling and warm, its light chasing away the shadows. For the first time, mankind felt the warmth of the fire on their skin, saw the glow of its light, and understood the power they now held. The fire was more than just warmth and light, it was a gift of knowledge, a beacon of hope. It allowed them to cook their food, to protect themselves from wild beasts, to gather together and share stories under the night sky. But more than that, it awakened something within them, a spark of curiosity, a hunger for understanding. With fire, mankind began to grow, to build, to create. They learned to shape the world around them, to fashion tools and craft shelters, to forge a future where they could thrive. Prometheus watched with pride as humanity flourished, as they rose from the dust and began to claim their place in the world. But his heart was heavy, for he knew that his act of love would not go unpunished. Zeus soon learned of Prometheus's deed, and his anger was like a storm, fierce and unrelenting. To Zeus, Prometheus's gift was a betrayal, a challenge to his authority. Mankind, once weak and dependent, was now growing stronger, more independent, more aware of their own potential. Zeus's wrath was swift. He ordered Prometheus to be captured, to be bound in unbreakable chains, and taken to the farthest reaches of the earth. There, Prometheus was chained to a desolate mountain, where he would face an eternal punishment. Every day, an eagle, the symbol of Zeus's power, would descend upon Prometheus and tear at his flesh, devouring his liver. Every night, the liver would grow back, only for the torment to begin anew with the dawn. Prometheus endured this agony in silence, his thoughts not on his suffering, but on the people he had saved. He had given them the fire, the knowledge to survive, and with it, the chance to defy the fate that the gods had intended for them. And though his body was broken, his spirit remained unyielding. Prometheus had given mankind the tools to carve out their destiny, to challenge the boundaries set by the gods, and to rise above the darkness that once held them captive. The story of Prometheus and the gift of fire is one of love, sacrifice, and defiance. It is the tale of a titan who saw in mankind what no one else did, a spark of greatness waiting to be ignited. And though Prometheus paid the price for his compassion, the fire he brought to earth continued to burn, a symbol of hope and the unbreakable will of humanity. The fire flickered brightly on the earth, casting warm light into the dark corners of the world. Humans gathered around it, their eyes wide with wonder and gratitude, feeling the first warmth they had ever known. They were no longer at the mercy of the cold nights or the wild beasts that lurked in the shadows. With fire, they began to take control of their lives, learning to cook their food, to forge tools, and to keep the darkness at bay. But far above, in the lofty heights of Mount Olympus, the sight of those glowing fires filled Zeus with a growing rage. From his throne, Zeus watched as humanity flourished, empowered by the gift Prometheus had stolen from the gods. What was once a fragile, insignificant race had now gained a tool that could shift the balance of power. Zeus, the ruler of gods and men, felt the sting of betrayal and the fear of what might come. Zeus's anger was not the simple anger of a god whose authority had been defied. It was a deep, simmering fury that gnawed at him day and night. He had seen what Prometheus could not, the potential for rebellion, the seeds of pride that fire had planted in the hearts of men. Zeus feared that with knowledge and power, humanity might one day rise against the gods themselves, challenging the divine order that had stood since the dawn of time. And that thought was intolerable. The more Zeus thought of it, the more his fury grew, twisting into a desire for revenge. Prometheus had stolen fire, but it was humanity that had accepted it, that reveled in it, that began to look to the heavens with less fear, with more boldness. Zeus could not simply take back the fire, it was already out of his reach, burning brightly in the homes and hearts of men. But he could still punish those who had dared to defy him. Zeus's mind turned, cold and calculating, searching for a way to strike at the heart of humanity. He wanted them to feel the weight of their audacity, to suffer for accepting a gift that was never meant for them. And then, in the dark recesses of his thoughts, an idea began to take shape. It was a cruel, vengeful idea, one that would bring pain and sorrow to the race that Prometheus had tried so hard to protect. Zeus decided to create a being that would carry his punishment to mankind, a being that would look beautiful and innocent but would bring endless suffering. He would craft something so perfect in form, so irresistible, that humanity would welcome it with open arms, unaware of the doom it would carry. This creation would be the embodiment of Zeus's wrath, a trap wrapped in beauty, a curse disguised as a blessing. Zeus called upon Hephaestus, the god of fire and forge, to bring this idea to life. With his skillful hands, Hephaestus began to mold the figure from the earth, shaping it with care and precision. He crafted a woman, more beautiful than anything the world had ever seen. Her form was delicate, her face a picture of grace, her eyes sparkling with a light that drew in anyone who looked upon her. Zeus watched as Hephaestus worked, his anger twisting into a dark satisfaction as he imagined the pain this creation would bring. When the body was complete, the other gods were summoned to bestow their gifts upon her. Aphrodite gave her beauty that would captivate all who saw her, a face that could launch 1,000 ships. Athena dressed her in silken robes, weaving wisdom into her being, but wisdom that would serve her purpose of deception. Hermes, the cunning messenger, filled her mind with craftiness and deceit, the art of persuasion hidden behind a sweet smile. But Zeus himself gave the final touch. He placed in her heart a deep, insatiable curiosity, a desire to know and to explore that would lead to her undoing. And with that, she was complete, perfect in every way, yet destined to bring sorrow to all who loved her. Zeus looked upon his creation, and a cold smile touched his lips. He would call her Pandora, which meant all gifted, for she carried with her the gifts of all the gods, both good and ill. But Zeus did not stop there. He had one more part to play in his plan, one final stroke to ensure that his vengeance would be complete. He gave Pandora a jar, sealed tightly, and told her it was a gift for mankind. He warned her never to open it, knowing that the very warning would only fuel her curiosity. Inside the jar, Zeus had placed all the evils of the world, disease, war, famine, and death, every sorrow that could befall mankind. And at the bottom of the jar, he placed one more thing, hope, the faint glimmer that would remain even after all else was lost. Zeus then sent Pandora down to the world of men, where she was welcomed with awe and admiration. Her beauty was unlike anything they had ever seen, and her charm won their hearts easily. They did not see the darkness that lay beneath her perfect exterior, nor did they sense the doom that followed her. They saw only the gift that she appeared to be, never suspecting that she was the punishment Zeus had crafted with such care. And so, Pandora lived among men, her presence a constant reminder of the gods' power, and the jar she carried a mystery that called out to her day and night. The fire Prometheus had given to humanity burned brightly, but with Pandora's arrival, a shadow began to fall over the world. The seeds of Zeus's revenge were sown, and it was only a matter of time before they would take root and grow, bringing with them the suffering that Zeus had so meticulously planned. Zeus's wrath had been unleashed, not through brute force or a mighty weapon, but through the subtle, irresistible pull of curiosity and the innocence of beauty. He had created something that mankind could not resist, something that would open the door to a world of pain and loss. And as Zeus watched from Olympus, he felt a dark satisfaction. His vengeance was complete, and the fate of humanity was sealed, all because of the fire that had once brought them hope. In the quiet, glowing depths of Hephaestus's forge, the air was thick with the scent of molten metal and burning coal. The god of fire and forge stood before his anvil, his strong hands poised over a lump of clay. This was no ordinary clay, but a piece of the earth chosen with the utmost care, infused with the essence of life itself. Hephaestus's brow furrowed with concentration as he began his work, every movement deliberate and precise. He knew that this creation was to be the most beautiful, the most captivating, the most perfect form ever made. With each strike of his hammer, the clay began to take shape, slowly transforming under his skillful touch. First, a figure began to emerge, the outline of a woman, delicate and graceful. Hephaestus molded her limbs with gentle curves, her hands with slender fingers, her feet small and light. He shaped her face with exquisite detail, high cheekbones, a softly curved chin, and lips that hinted at a mysterious smile. Her eyes, though still lifeless, were wide and almond-shaped, their lids closed as if they were dreaming of the world they had yet to see. The clay woman was more than just a statue, she was a masterpiece, a creation so perfect that even Hephaestus, who had crafted wonders for the gods, felt a pang of pride mixed with sorrow. He knew the purpose of this creation, and it weighed on him. But his hands never faltered. This was his duty, and he would fulfill it with all the skill he possessed. As he worked, the forge glowed brighter, as if the fire itself recognized the significance of what was being born within it. The flames licked at the walls, casting long, flickering shadows that danced across the workshop. The clay figure began to harden, taking on a more defined form. Hephaestus smoothed her skin until it was as soft as the finest silk, shaping her hair so that it fell in perfect waves down her back, framing her face like a halo. Every line, every curve was crafted to perfection, a testament to the skill and artistry of the god who had created her. But Hephaestus was not finished. he knew that beauty alone was not enough. She needed life, a spark that would animate her form and bring her into the world as a living, breathing being. With a final, careful touch, he breathed into her the breath of life, and the clay woman shuddered, her chest rising with her first breath. Her eyes fluttered open, revealing irises as blue as the summer sky, deep and endless, reflecting the light of the fire that had given her life. Pandora had been born. She blinked, taking in the world around her with a sense of wonder. Everything was new, everything was unknown. Her eyes, so bright and alive, were filled with curiosity and innocence. Hephaestus stepped back, his heart heavy as he watched her come to life. She was beautiful beyond words, but there was something else in her gaze, something that spoke of the fate she was destined to bring. Zeus, who had commissioned this creation, looked upon Pandora with satisfaction. She was exactly as he had envisioned, an instrument of his will, crafted with the skill of the gods, but with a hidden purpose that would soon unfold. But Zeus did not act alone. The other Olympian gods, one by one, came forward to bestow their gifts upon Pandora, each contributing to the essence of what she would become. Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty, approached first. She touched Pandora's hair, and in an instant, it gleamed with a golden light, shining like the sun itself. Her touch brought with it a radiance that would captivate all who saw her, a beauty so profound that it would be impossible to resist. Aphrodite's gift was one of charm and allure, ensuring that Pandora would be beloved by all, yet her beauty would be a double-edged sword, for it would also be the source of much pain and longing. Next came Athena, the goddess of wisdom. She looked into Pandora's eyes, seeing the curiosity that already sparkled there, and she smiled. Athena bestowed upon her the gift of wisdom, not the kind that leads to knowledge and peace, but a cunning that would allow Pandora to navigate the complexities of the world she was about to enter. It was a wisdom mixed with wit, a sharpness that could cut through any deception, yet it also carried with it the seeds of doubt and mistrust. Then came Hermes, the messenger of the gods, known for his cleverness and trickery. He approached Pandora with a sly smile, and with a wave of his hand, he filled her heart with a sense of curiosity that would never be satisfied, a desire to know, to learn, to uncover what was hidden. This gift was both a blessing and a curse, for it would drive Pandora to seek out the unknown, leading her to the moment that Zeus had planned all along. Other gods came forward, each adding to Pandora's being. Hera gave her the gift of grace, making her movements as fluid as water, her presence as commanding as the queen of the gods herself. Apollo gave her the gift of music and art, filling her voice with a melody that could soothe the most troubled hearts, and her hands with the skill to create beauty wherever she went. Demeter gave her a touch of the earth's fertility, so that wherever she walked, flowers would bloom and life would flourish. But for all these gifts, there was one more that Zeus himself bestowed, the most dangerous gift of all. He placed within Pandora's heart a deep, insatiable curiosity, a desire to know all that could be known, to explore the mysteries of the world. It was this gift that would lead to her undoing, and to the fulfillment of Zeus's plan. Pandora stood before the gods, complete, the sum of all their gifts. She was the first of her kind, perfect in every way, yet her perfection was a carefully constructed facade, hiding the truth of what she would bring to the world. Her beauty, her charm, her grace, all these were tools in the hands of the gods, designed to bring about the downfall of man. As she looked around, her eyes wide with innocence and wonder, Pandora had no idea of the fate that awaited her, no understanding of the role she was about to play in the grand design of the gods. She was a creation of divine will, a being of both light and shadow, destined to change the world forever. Hephaestus watched as the gods bestowed their gifts upon her, his heart heavy with the knowledge of what was to come. He had crafted her with his hands, but it was the gods who had shaped her destiny. And as she stood there, perfect and beautiful, he could not help but feel a pang of sorrow for the suffering that would soon follow in her wake. When Pandora was ready, her beauty unmatched and her presence a blend of grace and innocence, Zeus decided it was time for her to fulfill her purpose. The gods gathered, their eyes filled with a mix of admiration and silent understanding. She was sent to Earth, a gift wrapped in the perfection that only the gods could create, yet within her, she carried the potential for the world's undoing. Pandora descended from the heavens, her form gliding through the sky as the gods watched. The earth below, unaware of the coming storm, basked in the warmth of the sun, its people going about their lives in peace. But there was a change in the air, a subtle shift that made the birds pause in their songs and the wind grow still. It was as if the world itself held its breath, sensing that something extraordinary was about to unfold. When Pandora's feet touched the ground, the earth seemed to welcome her with open arms. Flowers bloomed at her step, their petals brushing against her ankles as if in greeting. She looked around with wide, curious eyes, taking in the beauty of the world that was now her home. The trees whispered her name as their leaves rustled in the breeze, and the rivers glimmered under the sun, reflecting her image back at her. The people of the earth had never seen such beauty, such perfection. Word of her arrival spread like wildfire, reaching every corner of the land. They came from far and wide, drawn by the allure of this mysterious woman who seemed to have stepped out of a dream. Her presence was intoxicating, her smile radiant, and her voice a melody that resonated deep within their hearts. They welcomed her with open arms, seeing in her the embodiment of all that was good and pure. But not everyone was so easily charmed. Prometheus, the titan who had given fire to mankind, had warned his brother Epimetheus about the gifts of the gods. Prometheus knew that the gods, especially Zeus, did nothing without purpose, and he had sensed that something was amiss with this so-called gift. He had urged Epimetheus to be cautious, to refuse any gifts from the gods, no matter how tempting they might seem. But Epimetheus, kind-hearted and trusting, could not imagine that anything so beautiful could be dangerous. When Epimetheus first laid eyes on Pandora, all thoughts of caution fled from his mind. She stood before him, her gaze soft and inviting, her smile filled with warmth. He felt his heart stir in a way it never had before, a feeling so powerful that it overwhelmed his reason. Despite Prometheus's warnings echoing in the back of his mind, Epimetheus found himself unable to resist the pull of her presence. She was unlike anyone he had ever known, and he was captivated by her beauty, her grace, and the kindness that seemed to radiate from her every word. Pandora, too, felt a connection with Epimetheus. There was something about him that drew her in, a goodness that made her feel safe and loved. She saw in him a gentle soul, one that welcomed her without question, without fear. It was this innocence, this unguarded acceptance, that made her fall for him. They were drawn to each other as if by fate, their bond growing stronger with each passing day. The gods watched as the relationship between Pandora and Epimetheus blossomed, knowing that the seeds they had sown were beginning to bear fruit. Zeus, in particular, observed with satisfaction as Pandora and Epimetheus grew closer, their love deepening with each moment. It was all part of his plan, a plan that was slowly coming to fruition. Their marriage was a celebration unlike any other. The people rejoiced, seeing in their union a symbol of hope and love. Pandora and Epimetheus stood before them, hand in hand, their eyes shining with happiness. The sky was clear, the sun bright, and the world seemed to be filled with nothing but joy. The gods had truly blessed this union, or so it seemed. But beneath the surface of this happiness, a storm was brewing. Prometheus's warnings, though ignored, were not without reason. He had sensed the danger that Pandora represented, the potential for disaster that lay hidden beneath her innocent exterior. And though Epimetheus and the people of the earth were blinded by her beauty and charm, Prometheus's foresight lingered like a shadow, a reminder that all was not as it seemed. Pandora, for all her goodness, carried with her a gift from the gods that was yet to be revealed. A small, ornate box, sealed tightly, rested in her possession, a box she had been instructed never to open. But as time passed, her curiosity grew. The gods had given her many gifts, beauty, charm, grace, and wit, but it was this curiosity, this insatiable desire to know, that would ultimately be her undoing. Epimetheus loved Pandora with all his heart, and she returned that love with equal fervor. They were happy together, their days filled with laughter and joy. But even in their happiness, there was an unease that neither could name, a sense that something was waiting in the wings, something that could shatter the peace they had found. As they continued their lives, the box remained untouched, a silent presence in their home. Pandora would often gaze at it, her fingers itching to lift the lid and see what lay inside. She would tell herself that she would not, that she must not, but the curiosity planted in her heart by the gods was a force stronger than any resolve she could muster. The love between Pandora and Epimetheus was real, but it was a love that existed under the shadow of something far greater than either of them could understand. Their union, celebrated by all, was a piece of a larger design, one that was moving inexorably towards its tragic conclusion. Pandora's arrival on Earth was a moment of beauty and joy, a time when hope seemed to blossom alongside the flowers that bloomed in her wake. But it was also the beginning of an inevitable descent, a path that would lead to consequences far beyond what anyone could foresee. The gods, in their wisdom, had set the stage for what was to come, and as Pandora and Epimetheus lived their lives in blissful ignorance, the world held its breath, waiting for the day when the truth would finally be revealed. In the quiet moments of the night, when the world outside had settled into a peaceful slumber, Pandora would often find herself drawn to the mysterious jar that had been given to her on her wedding day. It sat there, unassuming yet ever-present, its surface gleaming softly in the dim light of the fire. The jar was beautiful, crafted with care and precision, adorned with intricate patterns that seemed to tell a story of their own. But it was the secrecy surrounding it that stirred something deep within her, a curiosity that grew stronger with each passing day. From the very beginning, Pandora had been told that the jar was not to be opened. The gods themselves had given this gift, along with a stern warning that its contents were not for mortal eyes. She had accepted this without question at first, content in her new life with Epimetheus. They were happy, their love filling their days with warmth and laughter, and the jar had seemed like nothing more than a decoration, a symbol of the divine favor bestowed upon them. But as time went on, Pandora found it increasingly difficult to ignore the jar's presence. It seemed to call out to her in the stillness of the night, whispering secrets that she could almost hear, but not quite understand. The warning that had accompanied the jar began to feel like a challenge, a puzzle that demanded to be solved. What could be inside that was so dangerous, so forbidden, that even she, with all the gifts the gods had given her, was not allowed to see? The curiosity gnawed at her, a persistent itch that refused to go away. During the day, she could push it to the back of her mind, focusing on her duties and the happiness she shared with Epimetheus. But in the quiet of the night, when the world was still, her thoughts would inevitably return to the jar. She would sit by the fire, her eyes drifting towards it, wondering, imagining, her heart beating faster with the possibility of what might be hidden inside. There was a part of Pandora that wanted to obey the gods, to leave the jar untouched as she had been instructed. But there was another part, a deeper, more primal part, that was driven by the need to know, to understand. She tried to resist, telling herself that she should be content with the life she had, that some things were better left unknown. But the more she tried to ignore it, the stronger the urge became, until it was all she could think about. Pandora would often reach out to the jar, her fingers brushing against its cool surface, feeling the smoothness of the clay beneath her skin. She would trace the patterns with her fingertips, following the lines and curves, wondering what they might mean. Sometimes, she would catch herself holding her breath, her hand hovering over the lid, the temptation to lift it almost overwhelming. But at the last moment, she would pull back, her heart racing, the weight of the gods' warning pressing down on her. The internal struggle consumed her, a battle between her sense of duty and the relentless curiosity that had been planted within her by the gods themselves. She knew she should resist, that opening the jar could bring about consequences she could not foresee. But the more she thought about it, the more impossible it seemed to resist. The jar had become a symbol of everything she did not know, everything that was kept hidden from her, and the need to uncover those secrets grew stronger with each passing day. Epimetheus, unaware of the turmoil that raged within Pandora, continued to live in blissful ignorance. He loved her deeply, and he trusted her completely, never suspecting that she might be struggling with something so profound. Pandora tried to keep her feelings hidden, putting on a brave face during the day, smiling and laughing as she always had. But at night, when she was alone with her thoughts, the jar was always there, a silent reminder of the choice she had yet to make. One night, as Pandora sat by the fire, the temptation became too much to bear. She stared at the jar, her heart pounding in her chest, the room around her fading away until all that remained was her and the forbidden gift. She could feel the pull of the jar, stronger than ever, urging her to open it, to see what lay inside. Her hands trembled as she reached out, her fingers closing around the lid. She hesitated, a voice in the back of her mind warning her to stop, but the curiosity was too powerful, too overwhelming. She lifted the lid ever so slightly, just enough to peer inside, her breath catching in her throat as she caught a glimpse of the darkness within. In that moment, a cold, unnatural wind seemed to sweep through the room, extinguishing the fire and plunging her into darkness. She gasped, pulling the lid back down with trembling hands, her heart racing as she realized what she had almost done. Pandora sat there in the darkness, her heart pounding in her chest, her hands shaking as she clutched the jar to her chest. She had come so close, so dangerously close to opening it, and the fear of what might have happened sent shivers down her spine. But even as she tried to push the thought away, the curiosity remained, stronger than ever. She had only caught a glimpse of what lay inside, but that glimpse had been enough to ignite a burning need to know more. The nights that followed were filled with a new kind of tension, the jar no longer just a source of curiosity, but a reminder of the power it held, the power to change everything. Pandora's thoughts became consumed with the jar, her mind replaying that moment over and over again, the memory of the darkness inside haunting her dreams. She knew she should never open it, that the warning from the gods was not something to be taken lightly. But the curiosity, the need to know, was now a part of her, a force that she could not control. Each day, the temptation grew stronger, the jar's presence in her life becoming an obsession, until it was all she could think about. Pandora tried to resist, but the battle was one she knew she was losing. The jar, with its forbidden contents, had become the center of her world, and she could feel herself being drawn closer and closer to the edge. She knew that opening the jar could bring about unimaginable consequences, that it could change everything she held dear. But the curiosity, the need to uncover the truth, was too powerful to ignore. And so, as the nights grew longer and the pull of the jar grew stronger, Pandora found herself standing at the precipice, teetering on the edge of a decision that would shape the fate of the world. The jar, with all its mysteries, was waiting for her, and deep down, she knew that it was only a matter of time before she would give in to the temptation and open it, forever altering the course of her life and the lives of all mankind. In the stillness of the night, with only the flickering light of a dying fire casting shadows on the walls, Pandora's heart pounded in her chest. The jar sat before her, its surface glistening with a mysterious allure that she could no longer ignore. The struggle within her had reached its peak. Her mind screamed to resist, but her hands moved of their own accord, trembling as they reached out to the jar. The lid, so deceptively simple in its design, seemed heavier than it should have been, as if it, too, knew the weight of what was to come. For a moment, she hesitated. The warnings of the gods echoed in her mind, but the whisper of curiosity was louder, drowning out reason with a seductive promise of knowledge and power. Her fingers curled around the lid, and with a breath that shuddered through her entire body, she lifted it. What followed was a silence so profound, so absolute, that it seemed as if the world itself held its breath, waiting for what was about to unfold. The air around her stilled, and for an instant, Pandora wondered if perhaps there had been a mistake, that maybe the jar was empty, and her fears had been unfounded. But then, from the depths of the jar, a darkness began to seep out, twisting and curling like a living thing, rising slowly at first, then faster, as if eager to escape its confines. Pandora's eyes widened in horror as she realized what she had done. The darkness spread rapidly, filling the room with an oppressive weight. From within the shadows, there came a sound, a low, mournful wail that seemed to carry with it the pain and suffering of 1,000 lifetimes. It was a sound that reached deep into her soul, twisting her heart with a sorrow so intense that tears sprang to her eyes. And then, the darkness began to take shape. From the jar emerged sickness, its touch cold and clammy as it wrapped itself around the world, bringing with it pain and despair. Next came death, its presence the chilling void that sucked the warmth from the air, leaving nothing but a hollow silence in its wake. Sorrow followed close behind, a heavy burden that weighed down the hearts of all who felt its touch, dragging them into a pit of endless grief. And then came despair, the darkest of them all, a shadow that blotted out hope, leaving only emptiness and despair in its place. Pandora watched in horror as these evils spread across the world, her heart breaking with each new wave of suffering that they unleashed. She tried to close the jar, to stop the onslaught, but it was too late. The lid, so easily lifted before, now seemed impossible to move, as if it were being held down by the weight of the evils that had escaped. She fell to her knees, her hands clutching the jar as tears streamed down her face. The realization of what she had done hit her with a force that left her breathless, her heart shattering into 1,000 pieces. The world she had known, the world that had been filled with light and love, was now forever changed, tainted by the darkness she had unleashed. Outside, the effects were immediate and devastating. People who had once lived in peace and harmony now found themselves at the mercy of forces they could not understand. Sickness swept through villages and cities, leaving death in its wake. Families were torn apart by grief, their hearts heavy with sorrow. Despair settled over the land like a thick fog, obscuring the light of hope and leaving only darkness in its place. Pandora could feel their pain, their suffering, as if it were her own. It was as if the evils she had released were feeding off the anguish of mankind, growing stronger with each cry of despair, each tear shed in sorrow. And as the world around her descended into chaos, Pandora's heart ached with the knowledge that it was her hand that had set these horrors free. She cried out in agony, a wail that echoed through the darkness, filled with a pain that words could not express. The jar, now empty, lay discarded at her feet, a reminder of the destruction she had wrought. The weight of her actions pressed down on her, suffocating her with guilt and regret. She had been the instrument of mankind's suffering, the one who had unleashed the evils that would forever haunt the world. But even in the depths of her despair, there was a small part of Pandora that refused to give up, a tiny flicker of hope that clung to life despite the overwhelming darkness. She had unleashed the evils, but perhaps, just perhaps, there was still something left inside the jar, something that could offer a glimmer of light in the midst of the shadows. With trembling hands, Pandora reached for the jar once more. Her fingers brushed against the cool surface, and she hesitated, afraid of what she might find. But that flicker of hope pushed her forward, guiding her hand as she carefully lifted the lid. Inside, nestled at the bottom of the jar, was a single, small light, faint, but unmistakable. Hope. It was fragile, delicate, almost imperceptible against the backdrop of darkness, but it was there, a beacon in the midst of despair. Pandora cradled it in her hands, tears still streaming down her face, but these tears were different. They were not of sorrow, but of a tentative, trembling hope that perhaps all was not lost. As she held hope close to her heart, Pandora knew that she could not undo what had been done. The evils had been unleashed, and the world would never be the same. But as long as there was hope, there was a chance, however small, that mankind could endure, could find a way to survive the darkness. Pandora's heart ached with the weight of her actions, but she held on to hope with all her strength, refusing to let it go. And as the darkness spread across the world, hope shone ever so faintly, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there is always a glimmer of light that can guide the way. Pandora's heart pounded as she knelt beside the jar, the emptiness around her suffocating. Her tears had dried on her cheeks, leaving only the raw ache of guilt. She had unleashed untold suffering into the world, and now, silence filled the air, a heavy silence that bore down on her like a storm ready to break. It was in this quiet, in the stillness of her own despair, that she felt it, a faint, almost imperceptible presence within the jar. It was as though the jar itself was whispering to her, urging her to look once more. Her hands trembled as she reached out. The jar was small, yet in that moment, it felt like it held the weight of the world. She hesitated, fearing what she might find, but something in her heart pushed her forward. Slowly, she tipped the jar towards her, peering inside with a mixture of dread and desperation. And then, she saw it, faint, delicate, barely a glimmer, but unmistakably there. Hope. It was no larger than a spark, a tiny flicker of light that danced at the bottom of the jar, but it was enough to make her catch her breath. Her hands shook as she reached in, as if afraid that even the gentlest touch might extinguish it. But as her fingers closed around that fragile light, warmth spread through her, a warmth that chased away the cold tendrils of despair that had gripped her heart. Hope. It was such a simple thing, so small and seemingly insignificant against the vastness of the evils she had released. And yet, as she held it in her hands, Pandora felt something she had not felt since the moment she had opened the jar. She felt a stirring of possibility. The world had changed, irrevocably altered by the evils now unleashed upon it, but this small light, this last gift, seemed to whisper that all was not lost. Pandora's tears began to flow again, but this time, they were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of something else, something she had almost forgotten in the face of the darkness that had surrounded her. She wept for the pain she had caused, yes, but also for the realization that there was still a chance, however small, that the world could find its way through the shadows. Hope was the last thing to emerge from the jar, the final element in a story of despair and suffering. It had stayed hidden, waiting patiently as all the horrors of the world spilled forth, as if knowing that its time would come only after the worst had passed. And now, as Pandora held it in her hands, she understood its significance. This was not just a gift, it was a lifeline, a beacon that would guide humanity through the darkest of times. As she sat there, cradling hope, she could feel its light begin to grow, its warmth spreading through her like the first rays of dawn after a long, cold night. It was still fragile, still vulnerable to the harshness of the world, but it was there, and that was enough. Pandora knew that she could not undo the suffering she had caused, but with this final gift, she could offer the world something to hold onto, something to believe in. She could see it in her mind's eye, the people of the world, struggling against the evils she had released, their faces etched with pain and sorrow. But now, with hope, there would be a glimmer of light in their eyes, a strength that could not be broken, even by the darkest of forces. Hope would give them the courage to face the challenges ahead, to fight back against the despair that sought to consume them. Pandora's heart swelled with emotion as she realized that this small light could change everything. It would not erase the evils, but it would give humanity the strength to endure, to find a way forward even in the face of unimaginable darkness. And in that endurance, there was the possibility of healing, of rebuilding, of creating a future that was not defined by the suffering of the past. Hope was the last gift, and it was the most important of all. It was a reminder that no matter how dark the world became, there was always the possibility of light, always the chance for something better. It was a promise that even in the depths of despair, there was still something worth fighting for, still a reason to hold on. As Pandora sat there, the warmth of hope spreading through her, she felt a sense of peace that she had not known before. The weight of her guilt did not vanish, but it was softened by the knowledge that she had not left the world without a chance. She had made a terrible mistake, but in the end, she had also given humanity the one thing it needed most, the strength to carry on. Hope was more than just a light in the darkness. It was a force, a power that could inspire, uplift, and transform. It was the seed from which all good things could grow, even in the most barren of soils. And as Pandora held it close, she knew that she had to protect it, to nurture it, so that it could spread and take root in the hearts of all who needed it. The world was a different place now, changed by the evils that had been unleashed, but it was not a place without hope. And as long as hope remained, there was always the possibility of a brighter future. Pandora knew that her actions would be remembered, that she would forever be tied to the story of the evils she had released, but she also knew that she had given the world the one thing that could make all the difference. Hope. It was small, delicate, and easily overlooked, but it was also powerful, resilient, and eternal. It was the last gift, the final element in the story of Pandora and her jar, and it was the one that would endure long after the evils had done their worst. It was the light that would guide humanity through the darkness, the spark that would ignite the flames of courage, strength, and love in the hearts of all who believed in it. And as Pandora watched that tiny spark of hope flicker and grow, she knew that it was enough. When the evils escaped the jar, the world shifted. It was as if a shadow had been cast over humanity, a shadow that would never fully lift. People who once lived in harmony, free from pain, now found themselves facing suffering they had never known. The air grew heavy with despair, and the brightness that once filled their hearts was dimmed. Sickness spread like wildfire, touching every life it encountered, leaving behind a trail of sorrow and fear. Death, once a distant concept, now walked among them, taking loved ones away and leaving an emptiness that could never be filled. But even in the midst of this darkness, there was something else, something that pulsed with quiet strength. Hope, that small spark left at the bottom of the jar, began to take root in the hearts of those who had been touched by the evils. It was fragile at first, barely more than a whisper, but it grew as people began to cling to it, to nurture it as if it were their only lifeline. And perhaps it was. The world had changed, there was no denying that. Innocence had been lost, replaced by a harsh reality where every day was a struggle to survive. But with this new reality came something else, a resilience that had never been needed before. The strength to endure, to face the suffering with a kind of quiet determination that was born from the belief that things could get better, that life was still worth living despite the pain. People began to look out for one another in ways they hadn't before. Communities formed, bound together by the shared experience of suffering. They found comfort in one another, in the understanding that they were not alone in their struggles. And in those moments of connection, hope grew stronger. It became a bond that tied people together, a light that flickered in the dark, reminding them that no matter how bad things got, they could get through it if they held onto that small spark of hope. The story of Pandora became more than just a tale of tragedy. It became a reflection of the human condition, a story that spoke to the heart of what it meant to be human. People saw themselves in Pandora, her curiosity, her mistakes, her despair, and ultimately, her hope. They began to understand that suffering was a part of life, something that could not be avoided, but also something that could be endured. The evils that had been unleashed brought with them lessons that cut deep, lessons that were hard to swallow but impossible to ignore. People learned about the consequences of curiosity, the dangers of disobedience, and the fine line between innocence and guilt. But they also learned about the power of hope, about how it could sustain them even in the darkest of times. Pandora's story was a reminder that even when the world seemed to be at its worst, there was always something to hold on to, something that could carry them through. Hope became the lifeblood of humanity, the force that drove them to keep going, to keep fighting, even when it seemed like all was lost. As the evil spread, humanity was forced to confront its own nature, to grapple with the reality of suffering and the choices that led to it. People began to see the duality of their existence, the way that hope and despair were intertwined, each one giving meaning to the other. Without despair, hope would have no purpose, and without hope, despair would be unbearable. The world was no longer the same place it had been before Pandora opened the jar, but in some ways, it was stronger. People had been tested in ways they had never imagined, and they had found within themselves a strength they didn't know they had. They learned to cherish the moments of joy, to find beauty in the midst of sorrow, and to hold on to hope as if their lives depended on it, because, in many ways, they did. The story of Pandora became a guiding light, a tale passed down through generations, not just as a warning, but as a source of comfort. It taught people that mistakes could be made, that suffering was inevitable, but that there was always a way forward, always a reason to keep going. Hope, small as it might seem, was the most powerful force in the world, capable of turning even the darkest night into day. And so, the world moved on, forever changed by the evils that had been released, but also by the hope that had been left behind. People learned to live with the pain, to carry their burdens with grace, and to find strength in one another. They learned that hope was not just a fleeting emotion, but a choice, a decision to keep believing, to keep fighting, no matter how hard things got. Pandora's story was a story of humanity itself, of the constant struggle between light and dark, good and evil, hope and despair. It was a reminder that life was not about avoiding suffering, but about finding the strength to endure it, to rise above it, and to keep going, no matter what. The evils might have changed the world forever, but hope ensured that the world would not be lost to them. It was the last gift, the final piece of the puzzle, and the one that made all the difference. Through hope, humanity found a way to survive, to thrive, and to continue, despite everything. In the end, it was hope that defined them, that gave meaning to their struggles, and that kept the light alive even in the darkest of times. It was a small thing, perhaps, but it was everything. And as long as there was hope, there was always a chance for something better, always a reason to believe that the future could be brighter than the past. Pandora's name echoes through time, her story woven into the fabric of Greek culture like an unbreakable thread. Her legacy is not just that of the first woman in Greek mythology, but of a symbol, complex, tragic, and profoundly human. In every corner of ancient Greece, her tale was whispered, painted, and sculpted, becoming an eternal part of the collective memory. She was more than just a myth, she was a reflection of the human experience, a reminder of the fragile line between innocence and consequence, between curiosity and calamity. Artists and poets found in Pandora a muse who could evoke every emotion, wonder at her beauty, pity at her naivety, sorrow at her fate, and ultimately, a deep recognition of the hope she brought into a world darkened by despair. In the flickering light of oil lamps, her image was etched into pottery, her face sculpted in marble, capturing the moment of temptation, the tragic opening of the jar. Her story was told and retold, each time bringing forth new layers of meaning, new reflections on the nature of humanity. In the hands of the poets, Pandora became a tragic heroine, a figure who embodied the complexity of human nature. Hesiod, in his works and days, painted her as a punishment to mankind, a beautiful trap laid by the gods, her jar full of evils. Yet even in this portrayal, there was an undercurrent of empathy, an understanding that she was not entirely to blame. She was a creation of the gods, shaped by their whims, her actions inevitable in a way. The jar she opened brought suffering, but it also brought hope, a small, fragile light in the overwhelming darkness. Through the centuries, Pandora's story continued to evolve. In some interpretations, she was seen as a symbol of woman's destructive power, a cautionary tale about the dangers of curiosity and disobedience. In others, she was viewed as a victim of the gods' cruelty, a pawn in their games, her actions driven not by malice but by an inherent flaw instilled in her by those who created her. And then there were those who saw her as a figure of redemption, her release of hope, a crucial balance to the evils she had unwittingly unleashed. The duality of Pandora's legacy is what has allowed her story to endure. She is both the bringer of suffering and the bearer of hope, a figure who embodies the contradictions of the human condition. In her story, there is a reflection of the endless struggle between light and dark, good and evil, hope and despair. And this is what makes her so relatable, so timeless. Her story is not just about a woman who made a mistake, but about the choices we all face, the consequences we all must live with, and the hope that carries us through. As the centuries passed, Pandora's image softened in some ways, hardened in others. She became a symbol not just in Greek culture, but in the broader human consciousness, a figure who represented the dangers of unchecked curiosity, but also the enduring power of hope. Philosophers debated her story, artists reimagined it, each adding their own interpretation, their own insights. In the Renaissance, she was often portrayed as a tragic figure, her beauty and curiosity highlighted as both her greatest strengths and her greatest flaws. In literature, Pandora's legacy was explored in countless ways. She became a symbol in discussions of human nature, her story used to explore the themes of temptation, sin, and redemption. Writers saw in her a way to discuss the complexities of life, the way our choices define us, the way our flaws can lead to our downfall, but also the way hope can save us, even in our darkest moments. Pandora's story was not just confined to the ancient world. It has been retold in modern times, each retelling bringing with it new interpretations, new reflections on what her story means. In some modern interpretations, she is seen as a symbol of women's empowerment, her curiosity reframed as a strength rather than a weakness. In others, she is a cautionary tale, a reminder of the consequences of our actions, of the way one moment of weakness can change everything. But perhaps the most enduring aspect of Pandora's legacy is the way her story continues to resonate with people, even thousands of years after it was first told. Her story is not just about the past, but about the present, about the choices we all face, the consequences we all must bear, and the hope that sustains us. She is a reminder that even in the darkest times, there is always a glimmer of light, always something to hold on to, something to carry us through. Pandora's story is a mirror, reflecting the human experience in all its complexity. She is a symbol of the way we are all shaped by forces beyond our control, of the way our flaws can lead us to make mistakes, but also of the way hope can redeem us. Her story is one of tragedy, but also of resilience, of the enduring power of hope in the face of overwhelming odds. In the end, Pandora's legacy is not just about the evil she released into the world, but about the hope she left behind. It is this hope that has allowed her story to endure, that has made her a figure of timeless relevance. She is a reminder that no matter how dark the world may seem, there is always hope, always a reason to keep going, to keep believing, to keep fighting for a better tomorrow. And so, Pandora lives on, not just in the pages of ancient texts, but in the hearts and minds of all who hear her story. She is a figure of myth, but also a reflection of the human spirit, of the way we all struggle with our own flaws, our own mistakes, but also of the way we all hold on to hope, even in the darkest of times. Her story is one of resilience, of the enduring power of hope, and it is this that makes her legacy so powerful, so enduring, so profoundly human.